So this is the first video in a series of videos that will walk you through the process of creating an energy model for an existing building, running a baseline simulation, and then looking at comparative energy savings for different retrofit options, such as replacement windows or changes in lighting technology. The bulk of the videos are based on the OpenStudio SketchUp plugin, which is an interface that integrates with the Energy Plus simulation engine. So one of the core elements to Energy Plus is something called a thermal zone, and many of you may know this and you can skip over these videos, but if you're new to Energy Plus and you're going to start making models, this is a good thing to understand early on so that you have more of a sense of the impact of your decisions. So what is a thermal zone? In this case, we have a one-room building, which is a single thermal zone. And there are a lot of different loads acting upon this zone, and those loads are energy that are being added to the zone. In this case, we have a condition where it's hot outside and it's cooler in the zone. So these walls here are what are called heat transfer surfaces, and that's what defines the shape of a zone. They also have constructions with them, but regardless of how good the construction is, there is conduction of energy and heat through the wall from the outside to the inside if it's a hot to cold condition. We also have infiltration that occurs possibly at an intersection like a window to wall or just right through the wall itself. And then we have radiation through translucent surfaces. So sunlight has visible light and non-visible light, and in the infrared direction, and actually even in the visible spectrum, there is energy and heat with that radiation, and so that enters into our zone and impacts our zone by heating up the glass itself or shining onto the floor or other surfaces and heating them up. So just from the external loads that are kind of described over here, our zone's just going to get hotter and hotter if we don't have any sort of mechanical system fighting or counteracting these loads. But we also have internal loads. So people radiate heat not just like the sun does, but you don't see it. We have no visible radiation, but we have the infrared radiation, which distributes heat. And for example, a typical person might actually have the 120 watts of heat given off, which is equivalent of a pretty strong light bulb. So it's not insignificant when you start adding a lot of people to a space. Of course, we have lights we add, which we use to light up the space, but also introduce heat to the space. So we have two kind of loads with that. There's the loads of the heat being added to the space, and there's actually also a plug load that's just an electrical load that's being used to create that heat. So you kind of have a double whammy if you're in a situation where you're trying to cool your zone. And then we have something like a computer here, which acts very much like a light. From Energy Plus's standpoint, with a few exceptions, it's not about the light it's creating, it's about the electricity it's using and the heat that it's generating. So how do we keep a certain temperature in a zone? We put a thermostat on the wall, like we have over here. And for basic early design modeling, we use something called an ideal loads air system. What this does is I tell it that I want to maintain 70 degrees in my zone, and it looks at all the internal loads that are heating up the zone, and then it takes that energy out and it adds up that energy and it gives me a number. So in a perfect world with a super 100% efficient system, it tells me the amount of energy required to maintain 70 degrees in that zone with all these conditions acting upon it. Now Energy Plus does an annual simulation, and it does time steps that you can vary the amount of time, but a default time step might be 10 or 15 minutes. And so every 10 or 15 minutes, it's working like a bank account. It's adding up all these loads, and it's keeping track of how much energy is coming into the zone. And then it uses the ideal air load system, or you can use the ideal air load system to remove that and maintain a temperature. And your thermostat may change throughout the day as well. So the target you're shooting for is different. And Energy Plus will cycle through the entire year in little steps and give you time series data for that, or just an annual summary for all that information. And in a more complex example, instead of our building being a single zone, we have a number of zones next to each other. And what I'll mention for that is on this side here where we have conduction from outside, this would be an outside boundary condition. If we had another zone above us, that would be something called a surface boundary condition, where you have another zone acting upon it, and Energy Plus will calculate the heat transfer between those zones just as it does outside, but of course this might be 70 and this might also be 70, and so you won't have any loss. And then you have ground boundary conditions, which has a different physics behind it than what happens for heat transfer through air. So Energy Plus has a lot to it, and I don't want to get into the details, but I just wanted to give a basic outline of how that works, and then we'll learn more down the road. So the next video I'll jump into will help describe methods you might use to divide your building up into a series of thermal zones.